I would say the balance hits us with this character, Merryweather, who is our talking
Yeah.
crow. He basically provides a little bit more of that kind of and then that you're talking
Mhm.
about. He makes sure that the player is always at least aware of what they need to do next to advance the like main story of the game. He'll be the one that tells you it's time, like we completed the first level, the solar gardens is what we call it. We completed that. Now you need to go to the biofilter and fix that. That's the next thing you need to do. He's the one who's kind of responsible for giving that information to the player so that the player has it, because it is very important that the player does have that information and that clarity of, okay, I'm doing this right now, but I know that if I wanted to advance the story, this is what I would do in order to progress. So I think for us, it's about having that balance of the linear story that is like kind of you're pulled along by this character that is reminding you of what you need to do to complete the story, um, paired with these totally optional things of this open overworld that we're in the process of creating, which is the city environment of our island, where you can do all kinds of optional puzzles to kind of do what I talked about of beautifying the island, revitalizing the technology and the nature all around you. There's going to be a lot you can do in that overworld that won't have anything to do with completing the biofilter or going to the next temple or anything like that. But they are still part of the story because it's part of this overarching narrative of beautifying the island. So we
Mhm.
have this spine, we have this underlying through line of this character that leads us along specifically what we must do, but then all around that we furnish the flesh basically of the rest of the game. So we have our spine and we have all of our muscle and fat around it of the alternate content that you can explore and activate to enrich your experience and make it more compelling and more rewarding. But you don't have to, you know? And for us, I think that's kind of where the balance is. And a lot of games are so committed to their spine that they end up forgetting to flesh out the other stuff to support it, basically.
I think I just remembered what I was going to say. To kind of piggyback onto what Cece's saying too is I think a lot of narrative designers stop with the and then, right? So like and then this happens and then this happens. With games, you want it to be and then the player dot 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 as opposed to just and then dot dot dot. It doesn't matter if like the capital city in your world is suddenly assaulted by a plague if the player isn't there. If the player doesn't have an attachment to that place, doesn't have a reason to go save them, isn't led there by the quest, doesn't know anybody there. For you as the writer, you might be like, the city has a plague. Like, isn't that crazy? But the player like doesn't know or doesn't care. So it really is important to center every beat around where is the player in the world? What do I want them to be experiencing? And how much do I want them to know about what they should do next?
Mm-hmm.
It is really about like that type of goal setting is very important. It has a lot to do with like gameplay loops. You might have heard those terms like core loop, secondary loop, tertiary loop. I think like objective setting and narratively like knowing what you're supposed to do is a very important component of a really good secondary loop that keeps you engaged over a long period of time and not constantly thinking back to like, wait, what? And another way that we're kind of doing that outside of dialogue is by limiting, like players get their abilities sequentially throughout the game, sort of Zelda style. So we will limit purposely like what you are able to do. One of our abilities is sprinting. So you'll be able to see the entrance to the sprinting temple, but you can't get in there yet. So we are kind of forcing you to do that stuff, reminding you like there are barriers in your way. There are things that you don't have access to yet. Aren't you curious what you can do when you get those? So, and then the player goes to find out what the sprinting temple's all about. Like that's just a central part of our design philosophy.
I
Mm-hmm.
love that. I kept thinking about like Pokemon, for instance, when I was playing them when I was younger, and you'd be going by like maybe like in the second town there is the gym leader, but you can't go into that gym, or in the first town, I think in
Yeah.
Pokemon Red, and you're like, I can't do that. Why? Or you're going by
Uh-huh.
a tree and you need the HM to cut, but you can't do that, and
Yes.
you're like, why can't I get through this weird wriggly thing? And that,
Yes.
and then you just keep going. So it's like you're on your way, but let me just pick apart because you did mention core loop, secondary loop, tertiary loop.
Mm-hmm.
Aspen, I have to ask you, like, what do you mean exactly by those three? Like, what I'm picturing is like your core loop is, let's say, after the game is about me going to the store.
Yeah.
My core loop is just walk into the store and getting, or maybe like bringing the ring to Mordor. Then the secondary loop could be there are a bunch of trees on the way, and you can climb on top of the trees and see above the sky, and you can see like you can check that. And then the tertiary loop could be you can kick a rock or you can jump. There are just other things that are scattered around that you can get into. Is that kind of right? How would you define kind of the
It's funny.
secondary
I think like
center?
mechanically, actually, yes. Like a primary action, a secondary action, a tertiary action does sort of sound like what you're taking. When we say gameplay loops, what those really are is a contained series of actions that players take at different intervals throughout a game. So your core loop, if your game is about going to the store, would be walk and pick up items, presumably, if you're gonna be going to the store. Your secondary loop in a game like that would basically be like, let's see, go to the store and then like go to the hardware store. If you're going on a couple errands, you go to the grocery store, you go to the hardware store, and then you go to the doctor and then you go home. And then your tertiary loop is a day in the life. You know what I mean? So they are mechanical, but they're also narrative, so to speak, in the way that it helps designers know how often players should be setting goals for themselves and doing different things. So your example of seeing above the trees, for instance, I think probably would fit into like the secondary loop if there was a aspect of, wait, where is the store in this forest? Part of your secondary loop might be going up into the trees and looking around and seeing if you can see where the store is.
Mhm.
But your core loop would really only be that like walk, pick up items, maybe run away from an enemy if you
Yeah,
have something in your game like that. Cece, do you have anything to add?
I do actually. I think one helpful way to frame it up for people who think like I do is the core loop is what is the player like what verbs is the player doing second to second. Secondary loop is what is the player accomplishing? It can be verbs, it can be goals on a minutes to minutes loop. Tertiary is what am I accomplishing on an hours to hours loop. And that scales based on, how long your intended game experience is. An app's tertiary loop might only be 10 minutes, but Ghost of Tsushima's tertiary loop is like 40 hours. So I think depending on the scope of your game, the size of what you consider your core, secondary, and tertiary loops changes. But the simplest way to think about it is the core loop is what I do to accomplish the secondary loop, and the secondary loop is what I do to accomplish the tertiary loop.
And
Got it.
sometimes they're set up like by levels and stuff too. Like the core loop of this level is this, and the secondary loop is this, and the tertiary loop is like how to beat the level.
It's
If you ever
complicated.
end up in a bad situation, they're like a really good way to start, like almost like outlining your story. It's a really, really good place to start for new designers for sure.
Mhm.
So
But core loop,
oh God. Go ahead.
sorry,
Sorry,
go ahead.
Cece. No, please.
Um, I was just going to say core loop is absolutely crucial and often overlooked. Core loop is what I described when I say I want you to have the controller and have a lot of options. If you have a core loop that's rich with a lot of verbs of things the player could do on a second to second basis, your game will feel richer. You will have a richer, more interactive experience. The broader your core loop is, within reason.
So, so within reason and depending on the scope. So all these loops must lead to an end or an end to the game, of course, without spoiling kind of the end of this incredible game that you're building. What would be a good ending for you guys? What would it be for the player? What does a good ending mean in your minds? Just also for others that are maybe thinking about building their own game, but how do you end something? Like that's probably one of the hardest things
Yeah.
as an
Oh,
artist. Like when do you put down the brush and say, I have done my
oh
job?
my gosh. Yes.
Yeah. It really is the very hardest thing to do. You don't finish games, you just stop working on them, as Cece's boss once said.
Yes.
I think that it's actually funny. So Cece and I love Zelda games. Breath of the Wild is like our favorite game ever. One of our biggest gripes with that game is that after you beat it, after you go through the trouble of beating Ganon and whatever, almost nothing changes in the world. The characters still pretty much have the same dialogue. There's no like now society is coming back to Hyrule and like now, things are going to get better. Or even if the plot doesn't continue after that, there isn't this sense that you have like achieved too much in the world because you just feel like you got reset to back before you did the most epic thing that Link has ever done in this world. So for us, while our narrative does end, it's really important for us to build a world itself that has replayability in it. And
Mhm.
I think I don't want to, I'm going to say this and it's going to come out wrong, but it's almost like the story is like a facade for this world that you're experiencing. The plot is meant to act as a pulling you along and giving you a sense of all of the places that you have to explore in this world. So for us, the kind of natural ending to that was when you have explored all of the places, it culminates in this really beautiful kind of final cutscene, and CC's going to write a beautiful piece of music, I'm sure. But because the story is kind of like about the future and about creating a better world, we have an ending to our linear plot, but the idea is that the world itself keeps living. So I guess the answer I just gave you is that it's best to not end your story, which is not what I mean. But that is kind of what we're employing as a technique specifically for this game.
Yes. The way that I like to just describe it in a simple term is we're really hoping, fingers crossed, that we'll be able to have a post-game state. So basically, after you've completed the story, it's our objective to be able to leave the world in a way that you believe as the player, if you come back and continue playing the same save file, you believe as the player that the story is already over, and then the reason you're choosing to be here is to complete the optional side content, but you have the intrinsic understanding of, yes, the story is complete. There is not an additional thing that I need to do. I feel satisfied. I feel gratified. I completed the initial problem that this story presented me with, and now I'm free to enjoy the world that it took me through, just kind of at my own pace, at my own speed.